had sent off my daughter's, my husband's, and my DNA to the biggest, best genetic test on the market. And they had told us it would take about 3 months for us to hear back results. I think during this time we had really settled into this like mindset that we were okay to wait. We had done so much like searching and pushing for the past few months that this felt like, okay, like we don't have to do anything. In the background, we know that DNA is being tested and that someone else is doing all of the work. It wasn't 3 months though. It was just 3 weeks later. We got a call from the genetics office, just the front desk receptionist, and they said, hey, the geneticist wants to see you next week. Is it okay for you to come in on Tuesday? This was Thursday or Friday. So like we had originally been told the geneticist was a 2-year wait list, but then by the time we did get in, it took us about 2 weeks. And so here now they were wanting us to come in about 4 days. And I was very confused on the phone. I said, what do you need us to come in for? Like, does my husband need to come? What is this appointment? Because in my mind, it wasn't even possible that we would be getting results so soon. The receptionist said, I don't know what the appointment's for. So the genetic counselor actually called me back and said, we do need you and your husband to come in on Tuesday because we have some results. She kept it very vague, very short. She didn't say we had a diagnosis. She didn't say we had answers. It was just, we got the results of the DNA testing. So from that Friday to the following Tuesday, we had a lot of time for the anxiety and the anticipation to build. We just weren't sure. We're like, it's only been 3 weeks. Like, what does that mean? We were just so confused. We would later find out that anyone under the age of 12 months, their DNA is already put on a priority list. But then our geneticist was so concerned about what she was seeing in Poppy that she actually asked for Poppy's DNA to be expedited. So Poppy was under 12 months. She was already put at the front of the line and she was asked to be expedited. So she was really put at the front of the line, which is why we got those results back so quickly. But we didn't know that at the time. So Daisy, you just want your belly wrapped. So on that Tuesday, our daughter was in school, my son was in preschool, my sister-in-law was going to be picking up our son for us, and for all appointments, my husband would go into work first in the morning. Like he'd get to work at like 6 a.m., work as long as he could, and then he would meet me at kind of this like middle meeting point and we would head to the appointment. So I picked up my husband and we headed to the children's hospital again and immediately taken into this little room. I will always remember it. It was a windowless room that was very small and just had these fluorescent lights. And Poppy, she slept the whole appointment, you guys. She was just in her car seat, kind of on the floor. I usually held her for every appointment, so I just vividly remember her being asleep in her car seat. I think the girl was like, I don't want to hear it. Like, if I don't hear it, it's not true. Maybe I should have slept through the appointment too. But as I was saying there, the genetic counselor came into the room and she was holding a folder. And she sat down and she just said, you know, we found something on Poppy's DNA that we believe is causing all of these symptoms. Immediate, like she didn't even say what it was. I just lost it. I just started crying. I just had so much built up anticipation. Poppy was almost 10 months at this point. So it had been about 6 months of trying to find answers. And we were finally at this point where someone was about to give us answers. And I was so emotional before even hearing what it was. Before she actually told us what the diagnosis was, she tried to explain like the whole genetic system of what was going on. So she drew out a chart. She just said, you know, you and your husband each have this gene and you guys each have a mutation in the gene. Unfortunately, Poppy got both copies of the mutated gene. And so she explained that this was a hereditary thing, that Rosie and Peter also had a chance of having this genetic mutation, but they didn't. Then the next thing they did is they told us it's a mutation on the gene called TBCD. Basically, here's the gene, and then here's all of the symptoms that comes with a mutation of this gene. So we were showing like the cause and the effect, but I was still confused. I was like, but what's the outcome? Like, yeah, she's having these symptoms, but what is the outcome? And that's when the genetic counselor explained to us that she was trying to think of an example that we would understand. So she kind of described it to us like ALS, but in infants. And it's not like ALS, besides the fact that it's degenerative and it's a neurological degeneration and it's progressive. So it gets worse as it goes. I knew what ALS was. I was understanding that terminology. And boy, it was it was just horrible. Obviously, it was like, I think I like pulled Poppy out of her car seat at that moment, even though she was still asleep, because it was like I just had to hold her, you know. So after we got the diagnosis, we actually didn't tell anyone for about 2 months. I mean, we told our family and our very closest friends, but I didn't tell this TikTok community. My husband didn't tell his coworkers. We didn't really even tell our children. And this was over the holiday season. We had gotten this news in the middle of November, and I don't think we really told people until the middle of January. I do remember being at a birthday party for one of our kids, and I wasn't with Poppy, but one of the adults had asked, you know, how is Poppy doing? And the way I answered was just like, oh, you know, she got a really hard diagnosis, so we're just processing it right now. So again, I was like very vague with people. I think part of it was like, I didn't understand the diagnosis. I didn't understand how you can have 20,000 plus genes in your body and you can have a mutation on one of them, and it can be this drastic of a disease. Some of the things we did though in that 2-month period before we really told people is we did, you know, as much research as we could on our own. You know, the geneticist had given us as much information in like a packet as possible. Like she had printed out some information about a foundation for TBCD that had already been started. I found a couple stories of some other little kiddos, a Facebook group of the TBCD community. We joined it, but we didn't introduce ourselves. So we were kind of like flies on the wall for a couple months of this group, just seeing what other people were sharing, kind of following the other kids. But we didn't, again, introduce Poppy or our family for a couple of months. I need to backtrack a little bit. The geneticist had told us that the life expectancy for this condition was around 3 to 6 years old. And I remember thinking like, oh, well, Poppy's going to live to be 6 years old at least, because again, we are going to do everything possible for her to survive and to have the best life. Like we are such great parents. Like she will thrive under our care. We're in a mindset of just trying to be really hopeful despite the devastating diagnosis. So when we were on these sites, kind of learning and doing our own research, we were seeing that some kids were living to the age 6, to the age 9, and they were okay. You know, they're still doing research on this gene, and I think that they've learned that there's where the mutation is on the gene. So each gene is made up of like a code, a letter code, and depending on where the mutation is within the code affects the severity of the case in the child. Some kids, depending on where their mutation is, they might be doing better. It might not be as regressive, whereas some kids, who we think Poppy was on this end, she had a more severe mutation where her mutations were. So it just affected her body in a more drastic way. Anyways, I think we saw kids that were doing okay and we were hopeful about that. But at the same time, we knew our daughter and we could see that she wasn't doing well.